Hey everybody, and welcome to another MyJS story. This week we're talking to Justin Meyers. Justin was on episode 202 of JavaScript Jabber. Talked about DoneJS and CanJS. Does that sound about right, Justin?
That sounds exactly right.
All right. Do you want to give us just a brief introduction since we haven't had you on for about a year?
Yeah, so the way I would like to introduce myself is that I'm probably the most successful person in JavaScript with the least popular open source projects. And that's what I would like. In some ways, that's the backstory that I'd like to talk about. When you asked for like things to shout out about, I definitely want to talk about that because I saw recently Substack was talking about how he's worked so hard and done such he's done amazing stuff, but had so little like income to show for it. Right. I feel like if there's one thing that I could maybe teach people how to not be super successful in popularity, but to like be able to make a good living doing open source work. So my background is I built JavaScript MVC about like 9-10 years ago, kind of one of the early JavaScript frameworks. And since then, I've just been working on that. It's kind of spawned, broken up into a few different projects, CanJS, Steel.js, and now DoneJS, which is kind of like the super project. So I've been around. I was kind of involved with the jQuery community, did things like added event delegation to it, and sponsored a bunch of early JS comps and things like that, and just do a lot of we do JavaScript consulting, basically.
Right.
I work with Bitovi. I'm CEO of Bitovi, and we do JavaScript consulting.
Awesome.
This episode is sponsored by Newbie RemoteConf. Newbie RemoteConf is a 2-day completely virtual conference hosted by none other than Charles Max Wood. If travel expenses are an issue or you just can't afford to be away from home for 2 days, then join us. It's virtual. This conference is focused on people who are new to programming who want to learn what the pros know, or just get a leg up in getting a job and getting into the programming community. We'll have speakers from all over the programming community to help you stay current, and a Slack room where you can connect with speakers and other attendees in real time. We'll also have a live roundtable video chat for attendees and speakers, plus we'll provide the talk recordings to you within days of the conference.
So the listeners know the drill. I don't know if you've listened to any of these. Anyway, I have a number of questions that I'm going to ask, and we'll just discuss those. I'll probably ask more probing questions as we get into it. But let's start out at the very beginning. How did you get into programming?
So I was given, I feel like I've seen other people give similar answers to this. I was given a TI-82, like maybe 7th grade. And I remember getting it, and it allowed you to like pick your instructions. There was like a drop-down menu somehow you could select, and you could do like an if, and then an else, and then just random methods you could call. And I remember being very excited about that and just hitting like buttons to try to get the thing to do something. I had no idea how to program at all. And then I feel like I talked to a teacher or something. They gave me a book on how to program that. And then I started making video games kind of things with calculator games. And then eventually, I got like a C book and started making, and QBasic I started doing and making games. I was really into making games. I think a lot of people, especially in like middle school and high school, that's what I was doing, and then went to school for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mine was a TI-83, so
okay. So maybe I'm a little bit older.
Yeah.
About to turn 35, so that's if that age is.
Oh, me. I'm old. Okay. Yeah, I'm 37. So anyway,
maybe I got it at like 7th grade, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, I got mine around the same age. Anyway, so that's really interesting. So. Yeah, you get into that. It's really interesting, too, how many people I've talked to who, for whatever reason, were interested in building games. And so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting avenue in. So how do you go from that to, building DoneJS and CanJS and doing all this JS work?
Yeah, so it's kind of an odd story. My path was, I went to school for computer science. I worked in a parallel programming research lab all through college. By the way, if anybody is in college for computer science or whatever, one of the best decisions I ever made was, you can reach out to your professors and say, hey, do any of you have kind of internships or lab positions where you're just doing grunt work, like you're working on their lab's website to begin with? I worked in a parallel programming research lab. That's what they had me doing at first, just working on their website, writing up documentation for how to use their parallel programming framework, if you will. It's kind of like a framework called Charm++. Did that for 4 years, got a lot of experience. And then by the end, I was helping. I was doing still grunt work, but it was much, I guess it was better than making websites. We were doing protein folding simulation, and I was working for a PhD in chemistry and a PhD in computer science. And I was basically just there to help make the application program run as fast as possible. So I got a lot of experience with like network performance, things like that, which is great. I mean, best decision I ever made was just getting involved with the lab, working for next to nothing. But school teaches you a decent amount, but that was actual work. And then with that experience, I got a job doing at Accenture, a big consulting company.
Yeah, they're huge.
In the research and development group. And I made this big touch screen that people might still see at O'Hare. There's one at JFK as well. Basically because I had skill with, high performance networking and things like that. I used touch to triangulate, or used two cameras to triangulate where you were touching on the screen to simulate touch. And this was, again, like 10 years ago, before anybody was doing touch. It was really an awesome project to be part of. And the person who I worked for, Kelly Dembski, is just like mad genius. Just literally wrote the book on like high performance visualizations and things like that. I think that was the name of his book. I don't remember it anymore. So, but while I was at Accenture, I realized that Accenture would always brag about that they wrote more code than like IBM and Microsoft and Apple combined or something like that.
Right.
And it drove me crazy because they never did anything with that code. Like everybody kind of worked in their individual departments. There was no sharing of code. Open source wasn't as much of a thing as it is now. I don't know if they've since adopted that kind of stuff. My guess would be no. And I always just saw it as super inefficient, the way that a lot of consulting companies were structured around the sale, if you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like instead of the engineering side. So a buddy of mine from college, who also was interning at the time in the same group that I was working for, we started with trying to build something like FileMaker Pro. We just wanted to build something that builds something, because we wanted to reduce waste, if you will. That all these apps are being built at Accenture. These applications, they're huge, but we wanted to just build, be able to do mom and pop stuff real quick, turn that over. So we started building that. Totally wasn't successful, but at the same time, we had to build all of this JavaScript, tooling.
Right.
And this was 10 years ago when there was nothing. Like jQuery wasn't out. I think Prototype was. I think that was it. That and Scriptaculous, Dojo a little bit too. So we started building all of this tooling, and then there's just this crazy, fortunate series of events and weird series of events that all happened at the same time, which is like, we weren't making any money. I had like $120 in my bank account. My now wife, then girlfriend, was like paying for everything for me, like going to friends' weddings. She was paying for it. And then T-Mobile called and was like, hey, we really like your stuff. We're building this big application with it, JavaScript MVC. And we would love to, you and Brian, my business partner, to be part of it. And I was actually at the Ajaxian conference, like maybe the first one.
Ajaxian? I've never even heard of it.
Oh, remember the Ajaxian blog? Oh man. Okay. So I'm really old in JavaScript world. So back 10 years ago, there was like one place to get credible, great JavaScript information, right? Now JS Jabber has, of course, has become that great thing and the great work that you're doing. But back then, Dion Elmer, who went to do like head Walmart's labs, I think is now at Google. Ray Bango, who's like Microsoft's head evangelist, and there's a few other people too, ran this blog called Ajaxian, and it was amazing. That's where all of the best news was. They probably had like one or two articles a day, and they put on a conference like 10 years ago. They eventually got bought out. That's why it doesn't exist anymore. Some conference promotion thing bought them, and then they all left to go do other amazing things. But they had the Ajaxian conference. I had actually and this is why a lot of the old folks who do JavaScript like remember me, like Alex Russell and stuff like that, because I shaved away my hair and leaving JavaScript MVC in my head. Best decision I ever made, because like Alex Russell invited me to dinner 10 years ago at this, and then I met Christian Hellman, I can never pronounce his name right, a bunch of other Dojo and YUI people. That's where I met like Ray Bango, met everybody that way. But that conference where I had like no money was like the last desperate gasp to try to get attention for the framework so we could start making a consulting company around it. Shaving stuff in my head. That is when T-Mobile called and was like, "Hey, we want you to do consulting work on this to build this big application." And I was just like ecstatic, like just going crazy. So we ended up doing that project then, but was really crazy is a month, maybe it was only like 2 or 3 weeks later, I had a massive stroke.
Oh, wow.
And if the timing was such that like, if that had happened, like 2 weeks earlier before I had kind of made the first contract, I would have had to quit everything, go back to work, for somebody else. And then all of the stuff that's happened since then would not have been able to, because I wouldn't have been able to. I mean, thankfully I got insurance only because my wife, then girlfriend was like, you have to get insurance. And this is pre-Obamacare and everything like that. So she made me get insurance like 4 months before I had my stroke. So that was also really lucky. And it was just like this crazy time in my life where like everything happened. And then it's been boring since. But it's been kind of the same thing, just growing the business, that kind of thing since that point. But that's where, we kind of turned the corner right before I would have had to really turn things around a different direction.
That's interesting. By the way, Alex Russell is going to be the episode right before yours. So. Oh,
really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, cool. That's just interesting. So yeah. So first of all, where did the idea for JavaScript MVC actually come from? I mean, were you using some other MVC framework somewhere, or?
So we were using part of it. I think it was called JS Junction. It was, I can't remember the guy's name now. I think it started with like Max something. I can't remember his name. I feel really bad now. He put out something that was just like almost Sammy JS, if anybody remembers that. Just kind of like routing to like kind of actions and controllers, very Ruby on Rails esque. Would just the URL match something, call some methods, not much else to it. So we kind of forked that and added a model layer, kind of like Ruby on Rails, because I think everybody was using Ruby on Rails back then, and really heavily inspired by it. So we added something like a model layer that hits RESTful service layer. And we also added, I think the big thing that we added at the time why it was so appealing to people is we added event delegation, really, really solid event delegation. So you didn't have to bind on every click. You just listen to click once on the document, and you can have it when it matches CSS selectors. You can have your event handler called and don't have to worry about binding, which helps with memory safety and things like that. So that's we built all this stuff because we were building that FileMaker Pro, and it had like drag drop, and so a lot of rich features, which just it couldn't have been built as a normal website with just like the Ruby on Rails way of partials or whatever they called it, where you get back HTML and stick it in. It had to be built as a single page web application.
Right.
So I got into that heavy too with Peter Svensson, old Dojo contributor. He started the Thin Server Architecture Working Group, which I was a part of. And this is like when we were rebels 10 years ago saying, just send back empty HTML, let the client build everything.
Right.
People are like, you're crazy, you're out of your mind. But now, I mean, almost everything, at least everything we build, works that way. There's server-side rendering, of course, so you don't have the performance issues, but that's I think we were onto something. That JavaScript was gonna be a good bet.
Yeah, just a few years early, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I remember when Steve Jobs killed Flash. I remember where I was. Like people know where they were when Kennedy got shot or something. Like I knew I was in San Francisco at MindJet's offices, and they're like, "Did you see the news? Like that Flash will never be on the iPhone?" And I was like, "Yep. Now there's only one.
Yeah.
There's only JavaScript."
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, and I mean, it took a few years for Flash to go all the way through its death throes, but yeah. I mean, even Adobe, who kind of championed Flash, they had all the Flash tools and Flex and all that stuff. I mean, they moved pretty quickly into HTML5 and all of the other features that were coming through that, CSS animations and stuff like that.
Yeah, in some ways, like you feel bad for Flash because it was such a great platform, right? But it just lacked the openness that the web offered, and it's just like that. There's no stopping that. I think in the long road, that's just going to win out.
Absolutely. So you start doing JavaScript MVC. You kind of come into your own. When does Bitovi come into this?
So right away. I mean, Bitovi, like the second T-Mobile called us and was like, we want to work with you. It was like, gotta form an LLC. Gotta get an EIN number. So we started as Jupiter back then because we weren't creative and had no good names. I always hated the name, but it was like you need a legal company, and it was like we could get JupiterIT.com because I was still kind of coming from the Accenture, very corporate mindset. So we were that for a few years, and then eventually we came up with the name Bitovi, and we've liked that much better and had that since like maybe 5-6 years now.
Right. So then you started building things like CanJS and DoneJS. I don't know if I completely got straight the story on that. So it sounds like it was tied to JavaScript MVC?
Yeah, so what happened was JavaScript MVC was out there, and JavaScript MVC had like a lot. And JavaScript MVC was out a little bit before Backbone. And JavaScript MVC had like what people would, like Webpack in it, basically. Had a module loader, it had a testing framework, something like Karma in it, a documentation engine, and then it had all the MVVM, or at that point MVC parts. Right. And it was dying because, Backbone and it was just so much easier. If you're now everybody uses all of those things. Yep. Right. Back then, no, you weren't going to. It was, and even now, I think it's still like people like to pick and choose their individual parts and create a framework. I think that's part of what developers respond to, is that form of creativity and deliberation around how they build things. But so JavaScript MVC was just this huge unwieldy thing, and so we broke it up into all the individual parts. Okay. So CanJS is was the MVC parts of JavaScript MVC, but then it became MVVM. Okay. And that's kind of its own little project. It can be used with everything else. And then Steel.js is the module loader. And that came out of that. And that, of course, that can be used with anything else. And then Testy, which is the Karma-like thing, came out, can be used everything else. And basically we took every piece out and try to make it so it can work with, everything else.
Gotcha.
And then we were like that for a few years. And then we put DoneJS kind of back together, but we kept the ability for these things to work independently. But DoneJS is mostly just like your, glue pieces that glue them all together and make certain patterns easier when you're using the whole game.
Okay,
like
that makes sense.
Like that, yeah.
And is most of the development done by people at Bitovi, or has it kind of grown into its own open source community at this point?
So I would say the heavy lifting is still done by people at Bitovi, but we have like contributors that are not at Bitovi, like with full access rights and things like that. But because Bitovi has full-time people and pays for full-time people to work on it, the majority of the heavy lifting is definitely at Bitovi.
Gotcha. So I'm curious then, because it sounds like you're running the company. So how much time do you get to code these days?
Never enough, but I'm really fortunate to have Brian. He handles a lot of the consulting side of things. I'm still involved there, but I'm mostly focused on like long-term strategic development for Bitovi, and then which heavily includes the open source part of things. The way that I look at what we do is we don't have a sales team. Our marketing is our open source. So we put everything into that and then hope that people will use these tools, and then we can work with companies to help them deliver a product. But at the same time, then we're making our product better. We're releasing open source. Hopefully it attracts more people, and then the cycle should just keep going.
Right.
It means that I think we take a very different approach than other open source tools. Like that's what popularity is important to us, obviously, but we care a lot about long-term cost of ownership, right? If you pick JavaScript MVC 8 years ago, we want people still to be able to like upgrade through to the latest, greatest. And that requires a whole lot of work and means we're a little bit like half step behind what's the coolest thing out there. But we kind of don't give up on adding those new ideas. They land. And that's in some ways the good thing about open source. It's very easy to steal other people's ideas.
Right.
Because their ideas are open. You just got to include the reference.
Yep. That makes sense. So we've kind of gone into the next couple of questions. I did ask you how you got into JavaScript, and we went there. And then the next question is, what have you done in JavaScript? And we've definitely covered that. So now I'm curious. So what are you working on now? Like, what is the direction of Bitovi and all of these different pieces of what, kind of come together for a JavaScript framework?
So the coolest effort we're working on right now, the most interesting, is what does HTTP2 provide? How does that change best practices? And we've got this crazy idea about how to do streaming, server-side rendering, streaming that we're working on. I'll do my best if this is the kind of thing that you want to hear about to try to describe it. But we're looking at the possibility of when the user requests a page, we're going to push out the JavaScript assets. We're also going to push out basically an empty skeleton of the page, but we're going to kick off server-side rendering. And then we're going to push instructions on how to mutate the page to the client. And then the client, we've actually made this work, can, when it loads, basically do a very quick fetch for that stream of instructions. And then before the full JavaScript payload is loaded and executed, it can basically be getting a stream of DOM mutations and building the page up for the client. And we've done some testing, and it's really, really good for slow internet connections and slow browsers. So for mobile, it should give about as optimal performance as I think you can get.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if what I said makes sense, because it's a really weird way of making things work, but I think it should. I mean, my hope would be this is how, if you want high performance, like this is the approach that people are taking. And only because we have streaming APIs with fetch and HTTP2 push can this sort of thing be accomplished.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I mean, just the number of ways that HTTP2 can be taken advantage of, and then you have things like progressive web apps, which you've kind of nibbled around the edges of a little bit, but yeah, just all of these different things that are available for you to enhance the experience of using the web. And
it really changes how, like, best practice. One thing that we've realized while we're doing this is how do CDNs fit in with HTTP2 push. And we haven't really started exploring that yet. It's like a problem that is in the back of our mind, because with HTTP2 push, like, you still always are going to go to the application server, presumably, and that can it can start sending out JavaScript, but you don't really want it to start sending out JavaScript. You want it to send out JavaScript from a CDN.
Right.
So we haven't really figured out how to make that work, or like experiment with, is it worth it always going to the application server, or do you always go to CDN and that is really just like a channel to your application server? I'm sure someone else has figured this stuff out, but that's what we're we're experimenting with now, is how does HTTP2 change things, and fetch. So the other thing we're doing is we're making new line delimited JSON helpers. So Jake Archibald, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his last name, but the Google, he works at Google. He has a great series of articles about how, like, fetch enables streaming and like ideas. And we've kind of taken those and started actually building tooling around that, so that things like, as your database is returning one record after another, you can, like, instead of waiting for all of that to come back, serializing it to JSON and then sending it to the client, we could take each individual record, serialize it to one JSON row, and then send that to the client. And then the client can, like, get that one stream of JSON and then add that one LI or table row to the page, so the user sees it, like, all coming in instead of just like big chunks.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool stuff. I mean, it's just there's gonna be this second renaissance or something of JavaScript, when these, like, service workers and fetch and things like that add all of this low level power and possibilities. It's gonna be this time where people can be really creative with solutions. We're going to see kind of an explosion of ideas, I think, again. It'll be fun to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, definitely. So is there anything else you're working on that's not one of these things that we've already talked about? I mean, it's interesting to find out, somebody's got this weird project for this interesting niche that they just fiddle around with.
So I'm working on a generic parser, I guess, just to, I'm trying to make a very fast parse where you can give it a nice expression tree and it will parse anything pretty easy. It's not able to do a lot of contextual parsing, but for simple things, it's easy to express. It's kind of like Bison. There's another thing out there that does it, or JSON, which does it. It's modeled after that, but it compiles to the code that parses your code, which is really great if you know about your language ahead of time and want to go through these steps of compiling, but we don't really have that ability. So ours is all kind of runtime. Like, you provide the expression and it generates the parser kind of all in runtime. It doesn't, like, spit out code that is the parser. Doing that. And one thing that I think that we do that we're doing that maybe other JavaScript libraries and frameworks could learn from, and maybe other people who are writing application code, is we're doing the whole everything is an independent GitHub repository and package thing, where, like Lodash and all that, they maintain it in kind of one repository, and they do publish multiple packages. But what we're really trying to do is we're really taking the whole longevity thing to heart, and we're trying to make it so that we don't really know what the future is going to be, but we want to make it so that any code that you load isn't going to, like, you're not going to have to rewrite that just because a new version of our framework comes out. So as long as you can get the same package numbers, everything should be able to work. So we basically split up CanJS into like 60 different repos, and each has kind of its own different kind of release schedule and versions. CanJS itself is designed to kind of give people a guide, like which are the ones that all work really, really well together. And the other thing is we're doing is we're really watching out for globals. So so we're making it so templates, for instance, they should always import if they have custom event handling or something like that, they should import their custom events. I don't know. We're trying really hard to make it so that any code that you write, some other code, because it loads a plugin or a mixin or things like that, isn't going to suddenly break what's going on over here, or it can load a whole different new version. I think other things are going that way. I think decorators have really made that approach a lot more feasible for framework authors, is because then everything becomes a mixin on top of your class definitions.
Right.
So that's a lot what I'm thinking about, the unglamorous, completely unsexy world of making it so code has a very low cost of long-term ownership.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting.
So
not as exciting as the stream.
Is there a place where people can go and read about this stuff that you're working on, or?
Yeah, so Bitovi's blog has some articles about, and I'm about to release another one just about the longevity stuff, like what we're trying to do to make it so that whatever directions CanJS and our stuff takes, that your code should still work. Kind of the 5 different things we're doing. That should be out maybe another couple, like a week or so.
Okay.
But all of the other kind of roadmap and like what we've done, that's out there. The streaming one, you have to go to DoneJS's issues, and there's like this search for streaming, and then you would see there's GIFs and everything. There's one issue, kind of monster issue, that breaks the whole thing down, how it works. We actually did this at a hack night for University of Illinois. The initial kind of work towards it was all done by a bunch of students from U of I, which we guided through it. There's a bunch of other, the guy who made ARGs or whatever, forget his name now, Ben something. Anyways, he was there. There's a few other notable JavaScript folks at these hack nights.
Oh, nice.
Which is
cool. Well, let's go ahead and move over to the picks. Do you have some picks for us?
Have you ever felt like you're falling behind, or that the programming world is moving so fast that it's impossible to keep up? Then there's the issue of where to go to make sure you're up to date. The answer is to join a community dedicated to discussing the latest in JavaScript. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if you got JavaScript Jabber all day? Well, you can, kind of. We've created a Slack community for JavaScript Jabber. That means that you can connect with our listeners and guests on a platform you're most likely already using. Plus, we've set up a Keeping Current channel that pulls stories from across the web to help you know what people are talking about. And coming soon, we'll be holding monthly webinars and roundtable video chats to connect with experts in the community and with each other. So come join us at javascriptjabber.com/Slack.
Yeah, so I saw a talk last night. Dean Radcliffe is working on this Antares framework. It's basically a combination of Meteor JSX and RxJS. The interesting thing about it to me was that, how do I say this? it was Redux too, but there was it had Redux on the server. So all messages that the client, or most messages that the client is producing, most events that were eventually being reduced, that was also happening on the server. And then he was able to somehow do a diff to know what data must have been changed in the persistence layer.
Huh.
And it was kind of a crazy idea to have a server doing the same kind of reducer pattern, but then trying to sniff out, and how there's renderers, but having the renderers change the persistence layer. That was really interesting. It kind of removed the need for models on the client. I don't know. It was cool stuff. So it'd be interesting to see where he takes that. I feel like it's just the beginning of an idea. I think he'll have to, build a little bit more before I think it's totally production ready. Because this was just a demo at JavaScript Chicago.
Right.
But I think he's got some interesting ideas that might come out of there.
Very cool. I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks. I've got a couple of games that I've been playing on my phone that I've really been enjoying. I'm always a little bit embarrassed to pick these, but whatever. So the first one is Boom Beach. It's made by the same people who do Clash of Clans. And then the other one is actually Clash of Clans. And so Boom Beach, you kind of wind up taking over islands and liberating them from the bad guys. And then Clash of Clans is you build a base and then you attack other people's bases. You join a clan and you do clan wars. And it's way fun. I really enjoy it. And I'm in a pretty good clan, so I'm pretty happy with the group of folks that I play with. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just a way to relax, kick back, and enjoy it a little bit. And then,
do you need to warn people about how addictive it is?
Yeah, they
Clash
are.
Of Clans?
They are a little bit addictive.
So. I can say that I had to turn it off at some point. I had a huge clan. I don't know how much time I sunk into that game. It is really addictive. It's very fun.
Yep, it's a lot of fun. But yes, it is fairly addictive. But yeah. So those are two picks, and then another pick. And if people have been following you for a while, I have been fighting the CRM battle to find a good CRM, and I just hadn't been super happy with the ones that I had been able to find. I used Highrise. It's okay depending on your use case, but for me, it just wasn't working. And then I went from Highrise to 17 Hats, which sucked. And then I went to Contactually, which was much better, but still didn't do everything I needed. And now I'm kind of using a hybrid of two tools. One of them is bluetick.io, and I think I've mentioned them on the show before, but they're strictly speaking an email follow-up system. And so you just set up email sequences and that automatically follows up with people. The other one is Nimble, and that's at nimble.com. And it's more of a fully fledged CRM system. I would say that it's probably on par complicated as Salesforce, except it has a Chrome plugin and a bunch of other things that I really, really like. And it's not impossible to use like Salesforce is. So anyway, if you're out there looking for a CRM, yes, it's a paid service, but definitely worth checking out, nimble.com. So yeah, I'll throw all those out there. And yeah, if people want to follow you on Twitter or see what you're doing on GitHub or things like that, we mentioned the Bitovi blog, but are there other places for people to see what you're up to?
Yeah, Justin B. Meyer on Twitter.
Awesome.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, my GitHub is just too sporadic to actually follow me.
Yep.
I'm just all over the place.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thanks for coming and talking to us and sharing your story.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next week with another JavaScript story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.